internal audit, I may have a process sitting here called MEA02, Managed System of Internal Control. So this is internal controls. Again, this is not exclusively an audit tool, but I'm looking at this from a IT perspective. So what I'm going to do, let me bring a document over for you, a document that I showed you guys a little bit earlier, and we called that the governance and management objectives. If you guys don't mind, I'm just going to, for a few seconds, I'm going to stop my video as I go through this, because this usually takes a lot of bandwidth and I'm sitting in a hotel and I don't want to lose you guys. So we're talking about the governance and management objectives guide right here. So we said we want to look at the system of internal control. That's one of my processes that was pretty key for me. So let's go to, let's see, we found I can't remember the page number exactly. I just had it a few minutes ago. Let's go to, I think it's 279. And let me show you what Cobit says about this. So remember that list of all those 40 governance and management objectives, what you're looking at right here. Cobit tells you this for every one of those. Number one, it gets, by the way, here's MEA02, Managed System of Internal Control. By the way, that means this is now an auditable process. My audit process is auditable. Gives me a description and a purpose statement. It then links me to what's called enterprise goals. We haven't had a whole lot of time to talk about enterprise goals, but it links back to something called the goals cascade, which we'll hit in a few minutes. Gives you some example metrics. Oh, look at this. Do you remember when I told you guys about those things called components? And I said those components are the ingredients of my governance system. And the first component was called process. Let's break this down. This is my first component called process. There's 7 of these guys. What you're looking at right here, it says MEA02.01. Guess what that is? It's called a practice in Cobit. If I'm an auditor, what is it called? Somebody go out into chat. If I have a practice in the Cobit framework, what am I going to call that practice as an auditor? Anybody have any ideas? What that's called is a control objective. It's a control objective. You are looking at the first control objective. If you audited, you're auditing your internal controls process. That's a control objective. It gives me some metrics for this. And what's really nice, it gives me more detailed control objectives. It says, hey, here are the activities that I need to have in place in order for that to work. I think one of the nice additional areas is it gives us the different capability levels. You guys might be familiar with the CMMI. You guys know that ISACA, we do own the CMM Institute, and we've integrated that into the new version of this. So that is your first control objective. I need to make sure I have a mechanism to monitor internal controls. My next control objective for audit. Oh, before I do that, by the way, I just want to mention that for that control objective or that practice, now they give us some additional related guidance. They say you can go to high trust, ISO 38500, or NIST 800-53. Remember, I told you that Cobit is going to point down to what other frameworks are the most appropriate for you. My second control objective here, MEA02, review effectiveness of business process controls. Okay. So when we look at this, so then all of a sudden, this is this control objective, and it gives us some example metrics, and it gives us some activities here. So Uni, I see your question. I'll hit that for you in just a second, okay? Because basically Cobit's looking at kind of, if you think about it, kind of general controls or entity level controls that you might have in place. But it's going to focus down. There is a couple of audit programs that I want to show you guys that I think you'll like here in a few minutes, okay? So now we go, and there's a third control objective, perform control self-assessments. This is me. That's what I do in IT. I'm not doing that with audit. I'm doing a control self-assessment because I'm in the, if you look at the 3 lines of defense, I'm the control owner here. And it gives me related guidance. And of course, then there's my 4th control objective, identify and report deficiencies, okay? Gives me the basic information. So folks, I just gave you this example from a managing or looking at my internal controls. These same things exist for every process, from change control to incident management to service level management, okay? But remember, there's more than just one component. We just looked at the process component. So as an auditor, I need to know who does what sometimes. So we had those practices here. Remember what you're looking at right here, those 4 practices are what I call control objectives. What we did is oops, sorry about that. Let me get back down to the page. There we go. What we did is we took the roles that were most appropriate for this, and we gave you who's responsible and accountable. Now, that's the RACI chart. We did not give you the C and the I. If you look through this, there's no consulted or informed. It gives suggestions on who should be responsible and accountable. We found out that we're going way too deep if we start telling you who should be consulted and informed, because you guys know that every organization has different organizational structures, it has different cultures. The next component we have, this is awesome. Information flows and items. So what this says here is for each one of these control objectives, there's information coming in and there's information going out. Those are in terms of artifacts. And what it's saying is, here are the processes that it's coming from, and here are the processes that they're going to. I think that's very, very powerful for us from an auditing perspective, to be able to look at those artifacts and understand where they come from. The next thing we have here is people, skills, and competencies. Of course, it says what type of competencies we need to have in place for this. Policies and procedures, we stayed very high level. We need to have an internal control policy and a self-assessment policy. There's no guidance that we found in the industry that was relevant for us. And then, of course, the last 2 here, culture, ethics, behavior. Here's some cultural components and services, infrastructure, and applications areas that we need to keep in mind for this. Now, that is one of the 40 governance and management objectives. So let me go back to my slide deck and show you what we just did. What I just did was took MEA2, which was right here. Guys, every one of these processes or every one of these objectives has the same information based on that particular process, okay? So Uni, I haven't forgotten about you yet, but I do have a couple slides towards the end to talk about that for you, okay? Okay, so there's that goals cascade that I talked about. This is kind of cool. So we're not gonna break out the goals cascade for you in this presentation, but I will tell you, you can quote me on this. This goals cascade is probably one of the best kept secrets out there, okay? Because what it does, you take your specific stakeholder needs and you map them into a set of 13 generic enterprise goals into Cobit. What that does is that has a mapping table to 13 alignment goals, which is what we used to call IT related goals. And that will give you your governance and management objectives there, okay? Okay. This is huge, ladies and gentlemen. These things called design factors are absolutely key. What is a design factor? And here's what happened. This is where I believe you can actually create one of the best holistic audit systems out there. Okay, so here's what happens is most organizations just go out and they'll do some kind of goals cascade, or they'll say, well, let's just pick the most important processes we need to look at. Well, how do you know which are the most important processes to look at? So this all happened. By the way, these design factors, I did have a little bit of influence here because I was working with an international client out of Denmark, okay? And they were trying to figure out how they scoped their global auditing for the next year. And so what we said is, how do you look at it? You can look at your compliance requirements, and that's all they've been doing up to this point. All they were doing is taking the global compliance requirements and saying, here's what we're going to audit. So they were being checklist compliant, and they did not want to do that. So the first thing I said was, well, let's look at your enterprise strategy. Look up there in the top left. Right? This organization said, hey, we want to grow. We want to be very aggressive in our growth. Do you think that might have something to do with which one of those governance and management objectives seems to be most important? Absolutely. In my managed service provider, my board made it very, very clear. They said, look, we're willing to accept risk, grow, grow, grow. We want to double in size. That's our strategy. We want to buy companies and we want to create new services to double in size in 18 months because our strategy is to sell our company. So do you think there might be different areas I may be auditing or different areas I may be investing in because of that? Absolutely. Next, we have enterprise goals, right? That's my goals cascade that I talked about. Do yourself a favor and go out. There's some great YouTube videos. There's some the great short videos just talking about the goals cascade. To be fully transparent, most of them are mine, but I think it'd be good for you guys to get a chance to kind of see it because there's some really neat stuff on that because it says, how do you go through and how do you map your specific goals all the way down into these 40 governance and management objectives that are most important for us? Next, we have what's called risk profile. These are my risk scenarios. This is your risk register. This is where most audit organizations will go through and they'll do do some type of risk assessment, and they'll say, here are the risks we want to do. But just because those are the risks you identified in audit, do you think those are the same risks that have been identified across the entire organization? Okay. That's why my company was going out of business as the most secured company in the world, because all my audit team did was audit security. IT related issues. These are my pain points that I might have. And then here are a couple that are pretty close: threat landscape and compliance requirements. This is where most people get stuck when it comes to auditing. But folks, they don't have as much strength in my mind as these first four. I'm telling you, these first four right here are your most, or I pulled chat over, hold on, just saying, are your most important areas for, I believe, for you to look at to be able to scope your audits and have a good holistic look at how your organization is performing. So threat landscape says, all right, what's the general level of threat we have? Again, that could be different based on the company. If you manufacture bicycles, your threat landscape is going to be completely different than if your company is creating a serum for coronavirus. See what I'm saying? And compliance requirements generally are aligned with your threat landscape there. We have role of IT that says, hey, is IT a order taker? Do we see IT as a cost center, or is IT a strategic enabler for us? Sourcing model for IT, how do we buy things? Do we outsource, in-source, or a little bit of both? Implementation methods, big one here. You guys know that I mentioned something called high velocity IT earlier. Is your IT organization a waterfall approach? Is it a agile, or is it, are you guys looking at DevOps? That has a lot to do. Think about it. If you're an auditor, would you audit differently based on whether your organization was a waterfall approach or a DevOps approach? See what I'm saying? And there's a great tool that does this that I want to show you here in just a second. Technology adoption strategy. Do we buy things earlier? Do we buy them late? Enterprise size, and of course, future factors for us. So those are some things, what we call the design factors. Now, what I'm going to show you coming up here, guys, I'm not going to go through the entire tool. Out on the ISACA site, there is what's called a design guide toolkit. Okay, so what this does, if you look at the bottom of this, right, I clicked on design factor 1. It takes every one of those design factors that I just showed you, these things right here. Okay, it takes each one of those design factors and it has some input parameters for you. And look at the bottom. I can't zoom in on those tabs on the bottom, but if you look at the bottom, it has design factor 1 all the way through design factor 10. And based on your input, guys, this is huge for scoping your audits. It's going to come back and say, based on that, based on your, if you actually gave an accurate account of your attributes of each one of those design factors, it's going to give you a general level of importance for each of those governance and management objectives. So again, I'm not going to walk through all the details of what I put in on that sample, but if you look down this slide, let's move over here That's actually, we'll just use this first column here. So if you look at this column here, column G, it's telling me if it's on the green side, that means, hey, this is positive. We need to look at this from an IT perspective, from a funding perspective, from a resource perspective, from a maturity perspective, and from a control perspective. So the farther it is to the left means don't audit it, because that's not important to us, because IT's not focusing on it and it's not adding value to the business. The farther to the right it is means you need to focus on it. There's a big one right there just based on my input. You see right there, it says on the left, APO4, managed innovation, right? That was a big one for this one, okay? So I just want to show you. So what you'll do is to find this tool, I'll go back out to the Cobit site for you real quick. I'd love to send it to you guys. However, well, you know what? Let's do this. I'm gonna see. We're gonna try something here. I think I can. I know I can get away with this, but let me try something. I'm actually gonna see if I can give you guys this document out on chat. Give me a second to find it. I don't think I have it available handy here. Nope, I'll be fine. Give me 2 seconds. I'm going to drop this spreadsheet out there for you guys because I can. It's not, this is not, you can actually download it out on the ISACA side as well. Give me a second to find this real quick for you. You might as well have a copy of this. There we go. So I just dropped this out of the, it's supposed to drop. Let's see if it shows up. It's not dropping in for me, guys. So tell you what, I thought it was going to allow me to give that to you. It's not allowing me to do it. So let's do this. I thought they would let me do this. So I do see we have a couple other questions here coming out, but here's what I want you to do. Since I could not drop it on chat for you, what I want you to do is go out and remember I talked you through how to get to the Cobit documents. And then we have one of the documents called the Cobit 2019 Design Guide. Remember that one? If you go to that design guide, you click Learn More. Under Learn More, I know this is a little tiny thing down here that says Show Full Description. Click that. Oh, you have to be logged in. So it says here, then download the toolkit right there. You can download the toolkit in English, Chinese, Japanese. I'm not sure what Chinese Simplified is. I don't know. Japanese, Spanish, or Turkish. So anyway, kind of cool. So you guys got those down there. So I would go out and download that toolkit that I just showed you. It's a simple spreadsheet for you. Okay. You know what? If you have problems going on, find it. You'll have my email at the end of this, or I can send a copy to the chapter leadership, and they can send this out to you guys here. Okay. All right. So I will hit the crypto transition stuff in a second, but I got a question from Zaki that says, hey, as presented here, goals cascade always start with stakeholder drivers and needs. What's the most effective way to identify stakeholder drivers and need that reflect facts and real situation in the enterprise? So Zaki, simple answer. Guess what I did? When I did my goals cascade, what I did was I went out to my annual, to my annual report. And we did a quarterly report for my company. And we always produced, as an enterprise, we always produced our enterprise goals to our shareholders. So what I did is I went out and grabbed that information that we reported to our shareholders, and I manually mapped that into the goals cascade. Those were my stakeholder needs, and that's how we focused on that. Some organizations, it may not be the enterprise. You may be adopting this at your specific business unit. So you take your specific organizational goals and map them then directly into the goals cascade. I think that's the best way of doing it, because it's especially in Cobit when it says, hey, take your stakeholder needs and map them in. You're like, I have no idea what they're talking about. Go right to the goals of your higher headquarters. That's what they're talking about. Okay. Okay. So those are my design factors. What those are going to do is they're going to help me scope this audit out. So we need to go into risk next. So again, I know that wow, I've already taken quite a bit of time. So let's talk risk. So when you start setting this information up, there's a lot of definitions out there we need to understand. And we'll hit a couple of these things at a very high level, okay? So when we're looking at setting up our audits, we of course want to understand our risk types. So we see here that under enterprise risk, we have a lot of different risks out here. But normally what I'll see is operational risk is usually what people are talking about when they talk about IT related risks. So how do we set up and how do we look at those high risk areas? A couple of risk processes for us. Remember, just like we have in governance, we have risk governance and we have risk management. It's a general process. Of course, from a governance perspective, evaluate, direct, and monitor. We saw that in governance of IT, but here's my general process to risk. Identify them, assess them, determine my responses, and monitor those risks. Now, remember, those are going to set my ability up to actually audit these things. Now, go back to this whole governance and management objectives guide. So there's a lot of different areas here that have high levels of risk. Now, I will point a couple out for you. There's one right there called insured risk optimization. There's one here called managed risk. Well, what's the difference between those two? This is the governance and this is the management side of it, okay? Look at some of these areas, right? I mean, there's some of these areas that we actually should be really focused on risk. Look at this one, managed vendors. Do you think vendor management, third-party management has a high degree of inherent risk? Absolutely. Managed security, managed data. Each one of these has a portion of risk that links into it. Managed security services. Here's one, managed continuity, DR and BR kind of stuff. So notice that there's a lot of areas in there left. So I just want to make sure I pointed those things out for you so you kind of knew where the high levels are. Now, again, there's different risk scenarios you may have in an organization. I just wanted to point this to you that under the risk scenarios, Cobit actually does identify some very high level risk scenarios for you. And so if you take a look at these scenarios, if you find these, you go to what was called the design guide. It will give you these high level scenarios and it will break these scenarios down into more detailed scenarios for you. Okay, so that will help you out when you're really trying to take a look at how you're setting up your audit. A couple basic things here. When we assess risk, of course, we're trying to determine what we're going to audit. We want to assess the likelihood and we want to assess the impact. Let's say this example, we might have just a 3x3 grid. So what we'll do, guys, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one. You can take a look at this slide here in a few minutes. But what we want to do is we want to assess these risks and say, hey, which of these risks are high and versus our medium level risks versus our low risk. So again, which of those risks am I going to audit? I'm going to audit those areas up in here. My organization was auditing these areas, and they should have been auditing these areas up here. That's why my CEO said, we're going out of business as the most secure company in the world, because we hadn't really looked at the heat level of each one of those risks. And that allows us now to look at our risk, basically an overall risk register for that. Of course, our response options when we look at those risks, we could avoid it, meaning, hey, let's just get out of this thing altogether. We could accept it, which means the residual risk, if it happens, no sweat. We could share transfer. A common ISACA response to that is insurance, or we could mitigate. And that's what we now look at from a audit perspective, because I want to make sure the controls you put in place to mitigate that risk are behaving correctly. So we'll skip that and we'll go right here to this thing called risk appetite next. So let's say we talked a little bit about inherent residual risk, but I want to make sure as an auditor that I'm looking and making sure that these controls that are put in place are bringing my residual risk into an appetite level that's acceptable. What does that mean? So we've got this continuum. Let's say my board has a continuum, and let's just keep this very high level. And they say our risk appetite is right here. We're just going to call it medium, okay? Again, maybe different from some organizations. And we've identified a risk. And what happens is this inherent risk says, I have not put any controls in place, and it is way beyond high. It's right here. So what I want to do is I want to put a control in place, and based on the effect of those controls and my confidence level of those controls, it's going to reduce that risk down to an area that gives us a residual risk. If that is below my risk appetite, right, we have effectively controlled that risk. Many of you guys have seen this if you've been through any of the ISACA courses, either the core 4 plus even in CDPSE, there's the different types of controls that we might be able to put in place. You guys know I don't mean to speed up intentionally, but I know there's a lot of information that I want to share. I want to hit a couple questions at the end for you guys, okay? So as an auditor, what we want to do is make sure that these response components are actually doing what we expect them to do. Remember, we said after you put the response in place, you have what's called residual risk. What I would highly suggest to you is take those components. Remember those 7 components: process, policies. Remember, we saw these in Cobit: organizational structures, culture, ethics, behavior, information, services, people, skills, and competencies. And do yourself an evaluation that says, hey, how well have our responses been able to address these areas? Okay, let's move on a little bit. So let's jump past this one and let's look at some of these ISACA assurance references. Have not gone out and taken a look to the at the assurance plans that we have out on the ISACA site, do yourself a favor. Go out to this site right here, ISACA, go to resources. There is a huge amount of auditing and assurance related documents out there. But now to go specifically back to a question that I had earlier, here's a couple of really cool documents for you. Okay, so this goes to you, Uni. So hopefully this will be able to answer this for you. Talk about crypto transactions or blockchain. There you go, right there. Go to transformingaudit/isaca.org. There's an awesome publication out there to talk about it. I know that ISACA is continually updating each one of these documents out there. And this was a few months old. And of course, these things evolve over time. If you're looking at assessing IoT, there's a great one there. Cloud Computing Audit Assurance Program. Very solid document right there. And of course, we're starting to see a lot more around artificial intelligence. So that'll be a good one for you guys to take a look at right there. Okay. So what we've done so far is we've kind of given this overview of Cobit. What I've tried to do is say, look, don't go audit based on a checklist. Go do these design factors. Go look at your risks, and then determine the auditing that you want to do for that, and that will help you out. Okay. Okay. There, I forgot about this slide. There's Cobit family publications. Just because we're on Cobit 2019, don't think for a second that some of the Cobit 5 stuff is irrelevant. There's some great information out there. In fact, there's 2 documents. If you're a cybersecurity organization, I would look at definitely vendor management using Cobit 5. Even though it says Cobit 5, I do want you to know that you can map that quite nicely to Cobit 2019. And this one's a good one right here. This implementing the NIST CSF using Cobit, really good document there. All right. Okay, really quickly, let's jump in and start to talk about the assurance approach. And I want to link Cobit back into this for you. I'm not trying to teach you how to be an auditor. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm trying to do is show you a couple of points here where Cobit specifically can help you meet your needs. So you have different phases of this. Of course, phase A is when you're setting this thing up. Phase B is when you're scoping it, right? Phase scoping and assessing. Phase C is when you communicate that audit out. So here's a big one. Understand stakeholders. That was our first step. Where do you find this information? Remember, in Cobit, we had a component called organizational structures. If you don't know which stakeholders should be involved, go out to the suspected processes that you want to look at. Take a look at that RACI chart, and it will give you a list of key stakeholders that make the most sense for you. Okay. Next, determine the objectives and scope. Here's what we need to do. We need to understand, of course, the current controls, the regulatory environments, and we need to create our risk scenarios. But here's the big thing: use those design factors. That is huge, because actually this thing that says enterprise risk assessment, that is one of my design factors. Those design factors, those areas I told you, based on your attributes, that's going to basically drive what areas you need to look at auditing for that. Okay. Okay, got a couple questions out here. It says, hey, how long normally an average implementing full COVID-19 from 2019 from zero? So Denny, great question. My answer is you're never done. Honestly. So again, this depends on if you're a 3 billion. I was in a $3 billion company, right? It took me over 2 years. Okay. If I'm a 5-person bicycle manufacturer, it might take me 3 months. Again, so I'm just kind of saying that tongue in cheek. It just, a lot of it really depends on kind of your overall culture and the ability for your executives and for your sponsorship to be actually bought into this program. And what I tell people is, hey, if your executives or sponsor, if you don't have any sponsorship, hey, implement this in your own area. Think of your own business unit as an enterprise, and you can implement it internally there. So I don't mean to be wishy-washy on that answer, but I would tell you a typical organization that I would say over $100 million kind of organization, it's going to take you 18 months to 2 years. That's my estimate. Okay. What's the best approach to determine the risk appetite value? That's got to come from your board of directors. The risk appetite value. The board of directors should give you a high-level statement that says, hey, we're either willing to take risk or we're not. And usually that's very vague and very high level. But here's what I would tell you, Gautama, is that is your strategic level. Take that high-level appetite statement and say, now I'm at the tactical area. What does that mean to me from a tactical perspective? And then translate that down to the operational perspective. There's a great blog out there written by me. I talk about that very thing. And I say, look, you're not going to get very detailed appetite guidance from your board, right? You as a leader have to take the appetite level from the echelon above you and now need to drive that down and determine what that's going to look like for the people who are reporting for you. What measure to define capability level using so I'm not sure. To what measure, Haroon, I'm not quite sure I understand this. To what measure to define capability level using Cobit 2019 is all 7 components supposed to be calculated? Oh, okay. All right. So on that one, so we're still, I'll tell you what, we're still up in the air on that one. Okay. The Cobit 5 process assessment model is still legit. I am still doing full end-to-end assessments in the country of Jordan using the Cobit 5 process assessment model. The only thing I'm doing different is when I look at those activities for every process that they have to have in place based on the design guide, I have to look at what the capability level is there, and I'm using that as additional those additional evidence that has to be put together like for me. So yes, so basically level number 1, still you got to produce the outcome. You got to show that you're hitting the purpose statement. Yes. So basically, so Haroon, what you just said in your question, that's exactly what I'm doing in the country of Jordan and in Kenya today. Okay. Next question. You have a strategy or best practice to combine several compliance requirements and auditing as several standard. Yep. Okay, good. So what I would tell you is there's a lot of different requirements out there. First thing our audit team did is they went through and said, what are the parts of Cobit that are the most important for IT and most important for the organization? They boiled those down into the control objectives that made sense. Then remember in Cobit, what it says is, hey, you need more information. Here is the standard. Here is the framework that you need to go to. So we mapped based on Cobit as our driving factor. We mapped that down into all the additional compliance requirements you have. Now, not every single compliance requirement is in there. HIPAA, for example, was it in there? GDPR, was it in there? So we had to do that mapping ourselves. So hopefully that helped you guys kind of get that piece in there, okay? So let's see. Question. I just want to make sure I know, guys, that we're at the top of the hour, and I'll make sure that I go quickly on the last few slides. I just want to make sure that I address everybody's questions. ISACA has a great Cobit resources. IT folks don't know much about it. How's ISACA doing publicize? That's an ISACA question. Restiana, I don't disagree with you. One of my jobs, again, I don't work for ISACA, but I will tell you this: my goal before I'm done, before I retire, is to spread the word about this. Guys, think about it. When I just walked through that governance and management objectives guide, I was just showing you the internal audit one. There's a process for everything out there, but everybody still wants to go to ITIL. Again, I love ITIL. I was part of the ITIL 4 launch and part of the ITIL 3 launch, but it's very, very more specific to services management. My job, and if you guys can help me, hey, follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn, repost this stuff, because I'm trying to get the word out that if you are a CIO, I've been a CIO for 3 different companies. This has made us successful. But you know what? We didn't call it Cobit. We called it our governance framework. My board made it very clear. My board said, hey, we don't want to hear Cobit, ITIL. We don't care about those acronyms. We just want a governance framework, okay? Let's see. How's Cobit implementation regarding government institutions, since governments have their own regulations? Depend on the government. In North America, I've got NIST, right? North America, it's in good shape. Jordan, the country of Jordan, applied NIST and ISO 27000. You can map your own governmental entities into Cobit, guys. Remember I said it's flexible. This is not, remember, Cobit's not a standard. It's designed for you to be able to say, there are certain parts of Cobit in these practices that I have a specific national standard that, yeah, it should be mapped in. We didn't map it in as a design team because we don't, there's thousands and thousands of these things, but you can map them in yourself, guys. So I think that would make sense. So so that's where I would say that Cobit doesn't have a plan on it. Cobit's not going to implement your country standards. Think about it though. Every one of those practices and activities you saw in Cobit, even though it may not be specifically aligned to your country standard, you follow those, by de facto, you will probably be meeting 80 to 90% of your specific areas in your country that you have to meet. We saw that happen in Kenya. We're seeing that happen down in Turkey, okay? Okay, have you experienced using Cobit 2019, previous version? If yes, what's the most important value resulted from using the, okay, I will tell you, Zachy, the two best things of Cobit 2019. One is we took those enablers from Cobit 5. We now call them I keep calling them ingredients, components, and we broke every process down by the components. That's the first thing. Second thing, without a doubt, design factors. Those design factors I just showed you can help you pretty much scope almost anything you need to scope in your organization, okay? Okay, good questions, guys. Nice. Okay, so the rest of these, so the last 3 steps are basically, conducting the audit. And I don't mean to, to try to teach you how to be an auditor, but I do want to jump in and give you a couple of what I consider final tips and tricks. And then hopefully you guys have a couple other questions, because these are excellent. These are excellent questions you guys are having. Okay, first one is this. There's no surprise. Hey guys, use Cobit as a framework to manage your frameworks. Remember, Cobit's going to say which parts of this framework are most important to you based on your company. Now, Cobit's not going to answer every question for you. You got to do some work here, okay? But it's going to say, here are the areas you should be focusing on, and therefore, here are the areas you should be auditing. Next, again, like we said, don't get into the checklist compliant only. Again, I get it. There's pressure to make sure we're passing and we're compliant. But you can't be compliant to 100% of everything that every company has to be compliant to. use these design factors, use these risk scenarios to say, what are the most important areas? Because if I'm auditing you, you may say, we chose to accept that risk. And I say, really, tell me why. If you can prove to me the reasons why you chose to accept that risk, it may be a completely different audit because you have just reached a level of maturity that not many people have. And that goes back to those design factors. Yeah, just take a look at those design factors. Again, you guys know I'm not trying to get you to go to my YouTube site or anything like that, but I do have some videos that really explain these design factors and how they can help you in audit and how they can help you in identifying where you want to put your resources within an IT organization. And then finally, all the components, like we said, right? So your holistic audit program says once you've determined your scope using design factors, when you're actually auditing, you're not just auditing processes, you're auditing people skills and competencies, you're auditing organizational structures, you're auditing culture, you're auditing information flows and items, you're auditing services, infrastructure, and applications, and you're auditing your policies. So there's a lot of different things there, and that is how you stay afloat as an organization. And you have to have your CEO slapping his or her hand on the table and saying, why are we losing business as one of the most secured companies in the world? Okay, guys, I have covered a lot of stuff really fast. Okay, I jumped in and basically gave you guys a master's level course in an hour. Okay, but I wanted to hit some key points because if you're familiar with Cobit, a lot of this stuff made sense. You just made a link and said, okay, that's how I can scope an audit that way. If you knew nothing about this stuff, you may be overwhelmed, but you get a copy of this slide deck, and you might have to go back through and kind of say, okay, now I see where we were going with this. Okay. You guys, this has been absolutely awesome. I'm going to stay on here for a second because I know that we have a couple other questions. Let me hit them real quick. Can you give us a simple example of how in an enterprise, Cobit acts as middleware between frameworks? All right, we'll go back. Let me do this, okay? So here's an example. I hired a chief information security officer, CISO, okay? And that CISO believed that NIST was the answer to everything. My CISO said, basically, that's it, right? We are doing NIST. We're doing NIST. We're doing NIST. So I said, that's great. You can do NIST. That's fine. But NIST is not my IT governance framework. NIST is my cybersecurity framework. So what I said was this: hey, CISO, you can have that, but don't go adopting everything in every one of these areas because they may not be important to me. They may not be important to the enterprise. Let me look at my governance framework here to tell me what is the most important. Second thing is, man, my ITIL folks, we're going insane. I'm an ITIL fan. I'm actually an ITIL expert from version 3. I love ITIL. But they kept saying, ITIL, 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 ITIL. I'm like, guys, let's think about it for a second. Where in ITIL can you show me that we're linking up to performance and conformance in the enterprise? You can't. ITIL does not do it. You guys could argue with me that it does. I will prove to you that it doesn't. Cobit takes this, translates it to these, okay? That is an important thing. So remember when we looked at one of the processes, and remember at the end of every process, it said, here are some relevant frameworks, standards, and bodies of knowledge that Cobit says you should go to. That is where it's most important. So, Brina, I think that should help you kind of understand how this fits as a framework to manage framework, because Cobit points down. We didn't look at every one of these, but Cobit's going to point down and say, here's where you go in NIST, here's where you go to ITIL, here's where you go to TOGAF, and here's where you go to an ISO standard. Okay. Okay, good. Hopefully that helped. Let's see. Let me jump up here and see if I got all the questions here. If I'm down to the bottom, if I did not address your question, and re-enter it now for me, guys, because I do have a lot of text that I may have missed. So if there's a question I did not get for you, go down into chat, re-enter that for me, and I'll make sure that I at least try to address it for you guys before we finish up. Okay. All right. Looks like I may have most of the questions taken care of for you guys then.
Ya, thank you, Mark.
Right.
Bapak Ibu, silakan jika ada pertanyaan lagi. Kami masih punya sekitar 5 menit ya untuk sesi Q&A.
I can hang tight for just a second here, make sure everybody's okay, because I don't want to take off. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to take a picture of my screen and post this on LinkedIn. Is that okay with you guys?
Yeah, sure. No problem.
All right, there we go. All right, cool. Yeah, I just want to make sure you knew, because of privacy perspective, I want to make sure that if your face was on it, you knew that it was going to go on my LinkedIn.
Mark, we have another question.
All right, let's hear it. Let's see. Oh, I got it. How do we encourage the management to be aware that governance implementation is important, since that we need management support to implement this? I'm so glad this came up. This is huge. Here's why. So if I'm your management, I'm getting some feedback here real quick. Let me slow down. So, okay. If I'm a vice president of yours, here's how you get my attention. If you can link the governance objectives, or you can link the risks to one of my business goals or one of my business processes, you now have my attention. Here's why. As an executive in my organization, if my governance system works, I get rewarded. And again, when I say I get rewarded, that is not necessarily a bonus in finance. It might be, I might get recognition, I might get more territory, whatever. I get recognized or rewarded for meeting my goals. Punky, if you can actually now tell me, Mark, here's what governance is going to do if the lack of governance is going to prevent you from meeting these goals, or this risk is going to prevent you from meeting these goals, you have my attention, because guess what? You just got the attention of my reward structure. And I'm like, wait a second. You just told me if I don't have this governance structure in place, there's going to be goals that I don't reach. And if I don't reach those goals, by the way, as an executive, I don't get recognized or rewarded for those. I know this sounds bad, but that's what the recognition program is all about. If our recognition and reward system is congruent with our strategy, it works beautifully. That's my biggest suggestion to you. If you somehow, and again, I would go back to the goals cascade and link in the goals cascade and say, if you don't meet these goals from a governance perspective, from an implementation perspective, here are the goals you will not reach. And if I'm an executive who understands what my reward structure is, you have my complete attention. It's just a little trick I've always used. Okay. All right. Good. That was a good question. You guys, like I said, I'm very impressed. You guys have some great questions. So this has been fun. Yeah. All right, guys. I'll tell you what I might do is I might put this back over to the chapter leadership, and I hang around a little bit. And if I'll keep an eye on the chat. If you have any questions, just say, hey, Mark. I'll be kind of keeping an eye here for a little bit, but it is pretty late here for me back in Kansas City. But hey, guys, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your attention, and I certainly love the Cobit framework, and I've seen it adopted in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different cultures, and hopefully I get the chance to share this with something similar to this with you guys again in the future. ISACA, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate your kind attention, everyone.
Thank you, Mark. Next, we're going to have a quiz, but again, we would like to thank you for coming and sharing a great session today. And please, if you can give your contact, please do so in the chat so we can continue.
Oh, let me see if let me do this. Oh, I didn't put my Yep, I'll put it out in chat.
Yep, sure. Thank you. Then I will hand over to Richie for quizzes from your session, Mark. So it's a leave, then please do so. We would like to thank you and have a great night and take good rest.
Yep.
Thank you.